What is Old Frisian? As I mentioned in my video on where Frisian is spoken, West, East and North Frisian are all related through their common parent language, Old Frisian, and in this video we'll be finding out all about it. This is part 2 of my video on Old Frisian. Check out part 1 for a general introduction to Old Frisian. In this video, I'll be going through some of the dialect differences between Old East Frisian and Old West Frisian, and the various internal differences between areas where Frisian was spoken in the Middle Ages. I'll also be looking at what Old Frisian was like in terms of its sounds and how its grammar and morphology worked. So, enjoy! Old Frisian is usually split into two dialect groups, Old East Frisian and Old West Frisian. Note though that Old West Frisian might better be called Central Frisian because there was an extensive area west of here where Frisian was also spoken, notably in coastal Holland. So some scholars prefer to use the term Old East Frisian and Old Central Frisian. Old East Frisian can be further divided into Old Weser Frisian, recorded in the Rüstringen manuscripts and named after the Weser River, and Old Ems Frisian, recorded in all the other manuscripts and named after the Ems River, around which many of them were produced. The problem with this geographical division is that practically all Old Frisian texts are from before 1400, and almost all of our Old West Frisian is from after that date. So are we dealing with a dialect difference or just different stages of the language's evolution? For this reason, some scholars prefer to use classical and post-classical Old Frisian. In general though, most scholars agree that there are some genuine dialect differences based on geography along these lines, and others that are more diachronic, changes that happened in stages to both. So what are some of these differences? The rounding of a to o before a nasal is most commonly found in East Frisian texts, though there are some examples of it in early West Frisian too. The verb to have is represented exclusively as hebba, different to West Frisian habba. In the East Frisian area, the unique term redjeva, literally counsel giver, is found in its legal texts. This is never found west of the Lauwers in the western area. Based on Old Frisian's descendant languages, its verb for to grind is a cognate with the English word, grinda. Old Weser Frisian is represented by 4 manuscripts from Rüstringen and are some of the most archaic. There we find significant signs of I mutation, a term used when the presence of an I has influenced vowels earlier in the same word. So we see that the earlier vowel a becomes e, so harre becomes hirre. The e in the second part of the word dragging the sound up in the mouth, a, e. Compare that with the herre found elsewhere in Old Frisian manuscripts. A similar thing happens with kuningaj, becoming kinning rather than the kenning in other Old Frisian dialects. With a somewhat different result, I mutation also affects the u to o in open syllables before an a, so that where elsewhere in Old Frisian we find komma, dora, uppa, we find in Rüstringen komma, dora, oppa. Apart from I mutation, we also see some unique forms. We have or rather than other, and hiam as opposed to him. The mutation caused by the sound a affects the letter e in several verbs, turning nimma and vitta into nemma and veta. The diphthong a, which emerged in Frisian, monophthongizes in the Rüstringen dialect and becomes e, so dei becomes di, and vei becomes vi. The dative plural endings are quite unique in Rüstringen Old Frisian, with on being used after heavy syllables and un being used in light ones. So we see eithon and durun, where in other Frisian dialects we see eithum and durum. The specific Rüstringen form of church is sterke, as opposed to the tsjerke we would find in the West. The dialect of Old Ems Frisian likely has a distinct plural nominative and accusative ending, ar. The long air sound we just heard in eithon in Old Ems Frisian becomes an a before d, l, n and th. So bread becomes braid, bride and broad. So the West Frisian eithon in the Eames dialect would be eithum, as a result of both that becoming an e and the on, which is specific to Rüstringen Frisian, being in the other Frisian dialects. Eithum. Old Eames Frisian also added r in the unstressed suffix n. So wepern, lungern, epern, weapon, lung, and open, as opposed to wepen, lungen, epen. We also see rounding in words like aftne, alle, wald, becoming oftne, olle, wald. A feature specific to two manuscripts from Brockmaland is the form unga instead of the wider Old East Frisian form gunga. The specific Old Eames form of church is tsjurke, rather than the Rüstringen form sterke or the Old West Frisian form tsjerke. Some typical Old West Frisian features are the change of o to u before nasal consonants. The cluster w becomes simply o, so that chwet, chweder, twelef becomes hot, hoder, tolef, what, weather, and 12. And we also see that chwelik, chwelk, and chwek become hulk, hook, hock, which. The effects of this are still felt in West Frisian today, explaining why Dutch has velk, from a similar word to chwelik, and Frisian has hokker. Both mean which. We also find unique West Frisian forms like hiaram, hiarem, as opposed to him, and gaan and stan, as well as gunga and stonda, the forms we find in East Frisia. A few infinitives, verbs in the unconjugated form, end on an n, like dvan and sian, as opposed to dva and sia, to do and to see. These are the ancestors of the modern West Frisian dvan and sien, which are among a few irregular examples of infinitives ending in n. In Old West Frisian, the form habba is found, though sometimes the East Frisian form hebba is seen in a minority of cases. The word greta, related to the English to greet, takes on a specific meaning west of the Lauwers, where it comes to mean to accuse, and we can tell by the modern West Frisian miele that Old West Frisian used the verb mala, as opposed to the grinda found in the East, meaning to grind. The form for church here is found as tserke or tsjerke. It may also be possible to detect some dialect differences in the West Frisian region due to a multitude of charters from various locations. Differences here seem to have been much less noticeable than in the much broader East Frisian region, though little research has been done on the charters as opposed to the manuscripts. In the southwest of Friesland, goes to o before d, t, l, n in closed syllables, while in the northeast, goes to a in these cases. So while someone from Snit might say sotta and solla, someone from Dokken might have said satta and salla for to set and to sell. In the northeast, waza, as a variant of veza, to be, is also frequently found. Central Friesland retained the in many instances, so where our man from Snits might have talked about his iold and his fjord, someone from Ljouwert may have said yeld and fjeld, and they'd be talking about their money and their field. A particularly charming one is a west-east split and involves the word for road. In the West, the word for dike became a synonym for road as people would travel over the dikes as the firmest ground. In the East, the word vai, cognate with English road and Dutch weg, again with that Frisian palatalization, came to mean road instead. So both of these words for road, dik and vai, are found today in modern West Frisian. While it's fun to look at the differences in Old Frisian, it's also important to recognize the blind spots for where we have no information. We know based on place names, some leftover dialect words, and contemporary descriptions that Frisian was also spoken throughout Zeeland and Holland, the West Frisian area. But from this region, we have absolutely no manuscripts. For the Dutch dialect of West Fries or Hollandic West Frisian, I'll be making a separate video on that in the future, as many people have asked. We also don't have any Old Frisian from the other extreme of the Frisian language area, the north. In the 8th century already, Frisians were migrating to Schleswig-Holstein and settling the islands there, including Helgoland. In the 10th or 11th century, a second wave departed from Friesland and brought new dialects to North Frisia. These two separate migrations, occurring some 3 centuries apart, are the reason why there are now 2 distinct dialect groupings in the North Frisian area between the islands and the mainland. But again, we have no manuscripts and so no idea what this kind of early North Frisian looked like. We can only work backwards from the modern variants. How much what is written in the manuscripts is an active reflection of what was being spoken in the area around the monastery is also up for debate. A scribe might well have come from somewhere else in Frisia and then written vowels in the way he pronounced them back home, rather than how people in the monastery or the local area were pronouncing them. As we saw with the possible dual pronoun, languages often differ to greater or lesser degrees between their written and spoken forms. There's also the question of copying. Most medieval manuscripts weren't originals but copied over, though scribes differed on how faithfully they copied the texts, sometimes correcting as they went to their own dialect or updating archaisms if the texts had been written a long time before, and sometimes they just left it as it was. Old Frisian had become quite a different beast by the 16th century. By this time, the Old East Frisian area, where the oldest manuscripts were written, were now writing in Middle Low German, and our evidence for Old Frisian comes from today's Friesland. For the most part, though, the Old Frisian here changed because of internal sound shifts and changes, following in broad strokes some of the same developments as were seen in other Middle languages, like in Middle English. Before clusters involving dentals, lengthened to so that feld, ende, ben, svet, erde became veld, ende, ben, svet, and erde. Then sometimes also diphthongized, so the became to breed, einde, heinde, hela, mein, meide, feithe. Another change started to see the intervocalic voiced the dropped from words, so that broder and sneve became broer and snee. The voiceless th became voiced to the in weakly stressed pronouns and adverbs in initial positions, so that thet, that, there became that, there. V in the middle of words became pronounced as w, so that hove became hoe. The word for head, havet, became hawet, and then contracted further to haud, the origin of the modern West Frisian hat. Increasingly though, the morphology and grammar of the language was also changing. The case system was eroding on various levels. Often all sorts of inflectional endings were simply being replaced with a. Dative singular endings were increasingly being dropped entirely, and the genitive singular standardized across genders to is, and finally to sa. Old Frisian had 5 basic vowels: a, e, o, u. These could also be lengthened, which is shown with a macron in modern editions, but was largely left unmarked in the Old Frisian manuscripts themselves. A, e, o, u. Note though there is some variation here between these sounds. Even if they're shown with the same letter, the long e can be pronounced as e, as in words like fresa, while it's pronounced as an in words like sten. The same is true for the o, where it can be pronounced more rounded as an o in bote, or a less rounded a as in morne. Old Frisian also had several diphthongs and triphthongs, combinations of several vowel qualities. These could come in several varieties. One was the rising long diphthong, where stress falls on the final long element. Ya, yo, you, and ie. There were also 2 rising short diphthongs, ia, ie. Old Frisian had several falling long diphthongs too, where the stress was on the first element, ie, o, a, o. Later on in Old Frisian, at least in Old West Frisian, 3 triphthongs emerged: you, yo, Again, owing to the nature of Old Frisian orthography, no written distinction was made between yo and yo, though we know it was there based on the descendants of these words in the modern Frisian languages that have this distinction. The consonant system is fairly similar to English. One notable difference is the rolled r, r, also encountered in modern Frisian, but not in most English dialects. Several Old Frisian consonants can also come in two flavours, voiced and unvoiced, even though these are often written with the same letter in manuscripts. So we see that it's pronounced f in feld, efta, ef, but v in ieva and erva, i.e. when it's between two open syllables. Similarly, the s in hus becomes a z in the plural huses. This distinction is still found in modern English, for example in house and houses. Old Frisian also had the two dental fricatives, the unvoiced th and the voiced the, we still have in English. In Old Frisian, when it appears at the start and end of a word, it was unvoiced, as in tha, thiania, biteth. And when found in the middle of a word, at least together with voiced consonants, it was also voiced, like in feathere and wertha. Sadly, unlike Old English, it doesn't appear in manuscripts with the enigmatic thorn letter taken from the runic futhorc. The G, though not a fricative, does follow a somewhat similar pattern. At the start of words, it probably sounded much the same as in most English words, g, got, and gelden. In the middle of words, it probably became a ch, like in berga, volged, and volgia, while at the end of words it was devoiced, just like all consonants in final position in Old Frisian, and the G here sounds like a ch, as in berg. Note that this spelling distinction to represent the two sounds between r and ch is still seen in modern West Frisian, een berg, twa bergen. As mentioned previously, Old Frisian was a synthetic language with a case system, much like modern High German or Icelandic. Old Frisian was also a gendered language, where every noun was either masculine, feminine, or neuter, again much like the two aforementioned languages. So thimon, the man or this man, was masculine and took the masculine form of the definite article. Thiufroe, the woman or this woman, is feminine and takes the feminine form of the definite article. Though, as with other examples of gendered languages, linguistic gender isn't always identical with social gender. For example, thetweef, cognate of the English wife, but more broadly meaning woman, is neuter, not, as you may expect, feminine. I made a video on this topic and how Frisian still preserves the etymology of English woman from the very different sounding Old English word weefman. Unlike Old English, written Old Frisian has first and second person. No dual person is recorded. This was a special form of pronoun that modern English no longer has that refers either to we two or you two. However, there is some indication this was a difference between the written and spoken form of Old Frisian, as into the 20th century, North Frisian had a dual person used when speaking for yourself and one other person, or two individuals. We have a lot more texts and far more varied genres of texts in Old English, so it's possible that no dual is recorded in Old Frisian because there was little reason for it to be written in law codes, as these make up the vast majority of all written Old Frisian. These three factors, case, gender, and number, determined the word ending or inflection of nouns, pronouns, and adjectives. Nouns are all either weak or strong, which denotes they either have a lot of variation in their endings or very few. Adjectives are also inflected, i.e. their endings change depending on the number, gender, and case, and they can also be weak or strong, though that depends on their position in the sentence. If they complement the subject, as in the dike is high, it is considered strong and will take a strong ending, while in a sentence like the high dike, where it follows a definite article, demonstrative pronoun, or possessive pronoun, it takes a weak ending. Yeah, it is complicated. Just to make your heads hurt a little bit more, Old Frisian verbs can also be, you guessed it, weak or strong. But don't worry, this is a feature we also have in modern English. Weak verbs show the past tense by means of adding ed or sometimes just t to the end. Today I dream, Yesterday I dreamt or dreamed. Both versions are fine. Walk and walked. Strong verbs show the past tense by changing their vowel. Today I run. Yesterday I ran. Today I sing a song. Yesterday I sang a song. These strong verbs can appear in any of 7 varieties or classes of strong verb based on how their root vowel changes. The weak verbs come in 2 different classes and are either A weak verbs or Ia weak verbs. So that was Old Frisian. We'll definitely be hearing more about Old Frisian as the channel goes on, and I'll be back with some videos about Frisian runes, Proto-Frisian, as well as what happened to Frisian when it disappeared from the written record and how it re-emerged in the 17th century. Tune in again next week to find out more about Frisia, the Frisians, and the Frisian languages. Og dan, ik ben Hilbert en dit weer Frisian. Ontje. I, o, a, o. End on an n. End on a n. Verbs in the unconjugated form end on an n. End on a n. End on an n. Yo. O, a, o, 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 o. O, 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 o. Note this spelling distinction to represent the 2 sounds between r and ch. Stain. No. Oh, there's 2 of them. Hate. Late. Stan. Depa. I stand, I mutation. Oh. Blikstjender. Dela. Dela? Oké. Deze. Hoes. Broeka. Hoes. Broeka. Koeth. Moeth. You. Lude. Absorption. Lude. Frudelf. Therapy.